Hi, I'm Mike Sullivan. I'm the External Affairs Manager at the University of Georgia Skidaway Institute of Oceanography. Last summer, July of 2020, a colleague of mine, Ron Braxley, and I were asked to produce a virtual workshop for some of the other small shop communicators within the university to show them how to produce a simple video. This tutorial came out of that project. Now, this is not intended to turn anyone into Steven Spielberg overnight, but I hope to be able to give you a set of simple guidelines, rules that you can follow to produce a decent video that you can put on your website and not be embarrassed. Just like cooking or driving a car, there are some guidelines that you should follow to come up with a product that will deliver your message. Let's get started. So you've been asked to make a video. What do you do next? Our goal here is to teach communicators within the University of Georgia the basic skills and knowledge necessary to produce a simple video production for their departments. We're not going to get into the equipment in this program. That was a separate part of the workshop. But we do want to talk about the basics of clean video and audio, what to shoot, and we will have a separate presentation available on editing the video after you are done shooting. All right, let's talk about some basic do's and don'ts. The most important thing when you're getting started is don't get fancy. Don't try to make things any more difficult than it needs to be. It's better to have something clean and simple that gets your message across without a lot of clutter involved in it. First off, always shoot in the horizontal or landscape orientation. That is the way people look at things on a television set or on a computer monitor. You see people shooting videos with a cell phone where they'll shoot portrait or vertical. Don't do that. Most people are going to be watching this on a computer monitor, and you want to have the horizontal orientation. Always shoot from a tripod or a bracket. Tripod for a camera, you may have a bracket if you're using a cell phone. My old cinematography professor, Ed Wells, who I will quote a couple of times in this program, used to say that motion picture cameras should come with tripods welded to their bottoms. Well, there's something to be said for that. A steady camera is very important. Now, ironically, I'm going to show you some examples in a little bit where I shot some video without using a tripod, but I was in a small boat, and sometimes there are some circumstances that a tripod just isn't practical, but those tend to be few and far between. Don't pan, that is move the camera side to side. Don't tilt, that is up or down, or zoom while you're recording. You do that with the camera turned off to compose your next shot. Again, quoting Dr. Ed Wells, a motion picture camera is intended to shoot people or objects in motion, not the camera in motion. And you'll see this a lot with beginners. They just can't stand to be looking through a viewfinder and not doing something. The idea here, though, is to don't do anything. Let the motion, let the picture develop itself. Don't be moving the camera around. It's not necessary, it's distracting. And when you get to a point where you know how to break these rules, that's fine, but first you should follow the rules. Think in terms of shooting a still camera, but instead of an exposure time of 1/25 of a second, you're going to have an exposure time of about 10 seconds. Each one, hold the camera still, let the scene develop, and generally speaking, allow each shot to last at least 10 seconds. Some basic do's and don'ts. When shooting general video, start with an establishing wide shot. If you're shooting some activity, a group of people, start with a nice wide shot that shows the whole scene, the whole picture. Avoid jump cuts. Now I'm going to tell you what that is in just a second. Also shoot cutaways and cut-ins. Again, I'm going to show you that in a second. And shoot a sequence of shots of the subject. That is, if you have one subject, shoot a wide shot, a medium shot, then multiple close-up shots. A couple of definition of terms when we talk about cover video or B-roll, anything that is not a person talking to the camera or being interviewed is what we would consider cover roll, B-roll, or general. A jump cut is when you take two shots of a person, usually a person, and they're in different positions. For example, a person sitting down and a person standing up. Well, if you take those two shots and butt them together, well, the person literally jumps out of their chair when the scene changes. You don't want to have a jump cut. You avoid the jump cut in the editing process, but before you can do that in the editing process, you have to make sure you shoot what you need while you're out in the field, so you can have them when you get into the editing. All right, let's talk about a jump cut. Let's see what this is. Watch the fellow in the pink shirt. There he is. He's standing up. And then we go to the next shot and suddenly he's sitting down. That is a jump cut. Let's try it again. Standing up, and then without any continuity, boom, all of a sudden he's in a different position. That's a jump cut. It's all right in the field. You fix it in the editing process. And here's what I'm talking about. We have him standing up. And then we shoot what's called a cutaway, which is a related shot. And then we go back to him sitting down and there's no abrupt change there. That's a cut in. So you have cutaways and cut ins. Now we can go to a different shot. We've shot the same set of subjects different ways. We're going to show that again. Wide shot. Cutaway. Allows you to get to almost anything. Now we're back to Jacob. There he is in the boat. We're going to cut in, another shot, cut in close. See, it works. And now we cut back out again to another shot of them working. That's how you avoid a jump cut. You shoot cutaways or cut ins, and you use them in the editing process. But remember, you do that in the editing. That's fine. You can shoot your shots in any order, but in the editing process, you assemble them. But if you don't have the cutaways or the cut-ins when you shoot it, you're not going to have them in the editing room. If you shoot a person in front of a building, a lot of people will tend to shoot on the left. They want to get the whole building, and they'll have the person standing over there as a tiny little figure in front of the big building. And if you want to have a person in front of a building or another scene, still shoot wide, but put the person closer to the camera. When shooting a person speaking to the camera, such as an interview, or perhaps you have a department head or a dean or something that's literally addressing the camera, front light the subject. That means they should have them face the light source. The light should be behind the camera. In the outdoors, that would be sun. If you're in direct sun, watch out for your own shadow in the shot. If you're in direct sun, I'm taping this in the middle of the summer, and midday overhead light is terrible. You get big shadows on their face. You can get away with shooting in the shade so long as you make sure the background is darker than the subject's face. Take special care with darker skin. Overcast days are good, but don't have a gray sky as the background. The gray sky is actually very bright. So the idea is that the person's face should have approximately the same amount of light as the background. That's because you're probably going to be shooting with a camera with automatic exposure. And if it picks up a bright background, it's going to darken the person's face, like this picture on the left. This was shot in the same location. I just turned the subject around. On the left, you have a bright sky, kind of a little light overcast. Well, the camera is taking that bright background, it's stopping down the exposure, and so the person's face is darker and shadowed. The exact same position, exact same time. I spun her around 180 degrees, and now she has a dark background there. The camera opens up the exposure, and her face is more properly exposed. Some additional tips if you're indoors: avoid a flat wall as a background. Avoid a bright window as a background. If you have that, you're gonna have the same thing we had just a moment ago. Bright background, dark face, doesn't work. If needed, turn on a few lights. Even table lamps can be helpful. Some additional tips. Place the camera at the same level as the subject's eyes. You don't want to be shooting up on them. You don't want to be shooting down. If they're sitting down, put the camera down at their level. If they're standing up, put the camera up. Fill the frame. Place the subject's eyes approximately a third of the way from the top of the frame. Leave a little headroom, and think about the rule of thirds. Rule of thirds is imagine that your frame is divided both vertically and horizontally into thirds. That is, if you'll notice, take a look at this lady's eyes. They're approximately 1/3 the way from the left to the right in the frame. They're also about 1/3 of the top to the bottom. It provides a more aesthetically pleasing composition than having them dead center, dead center on in the frame. Pay attention to the background. Avoid distractions. Really, we've all seen those pictures and things on YouTube and Facebook where the couple is getting married on the beach or in the park, and there's a dog doing their business in the background. You want to watch out for things like that. So pay attention to your background. Also pay attention to background noise. Traffic, air conditioning, blowers and fans can really affect your noise. Sometimes microphones will pick those up and accentuate them much more than you would hear from your from your ear. Your brain will tend to tune that out. The microphone does not. Advise the subject to wear something plain and neutral. Avoid bold prints and plaids that again will be distracting. And use a lavalier mic. Have the subject drop the cord under their shirt or jacket or top. If you are shooting with a camera, a cell phone, a smartphone, get some kind of microphone that would be appropriate for that. If your subject is 5 or 6 feet away from your smartphone and they're talking and you're trying to use the microphone on the cell phone to pick up their voice, it's not going to come out well. It's not going to come out well at all. You may have someone addressing a camera, talking to, and what you want to do in that case is break the on-camera script into manageable bites. Have them say a few sentences, then change the framing between the bites. If someone has to remember 3 or 4 minutes of copy, it can be very difficult. They get nervous, they forget, they stumble, and it gets to be very rough. But if you break that into paragraphs, if you will, you can break that up. They say a little bit, pause, stop the camera, regroup, take a look at the next bit, do another segment, then do another segment. You can do the same thing, and then you change the framing between the bites, and I'll show you that in just a second. You can do the same thing if the subject makes a mistake and you don't want to start all over again from the beginning. And shoot cutaways in case you have a transition in the editing process. If you're talking to someone in their office, for example, they're sitting behind the desk and they're talking to the camera, welcoming new students to campus or whatever the case may be. shoot a couple of the other things around the office, like their nameplate, the diploma on the wall, a vase of flowers on the credenza. And if there's a mistake, if you have two, you need to break up something because they made a mistake and you need to butt two pieces together. And to avoid that jump cut, you've got something you can use as a visual transition. Here's an example of changing the framing. If Laura here were talking to the camera in the left-hand frame, and she says a paragraph, then stops, and we change the framing to the one on the right, and she picks up with the next paragraph. You can go back and forth between these two different framings all day, and have her the opportunity to deliver what she wants to say in small segments, bite-sized pieces, if you will, and still not have to worry about cutaways or having jump cuts there. And you notice when she is slightly off to the left in the picture on the left, and then she's centered in the picture on the right. Well, I did that to make a distinct difference between the two framing. Then when we go back and forth between the two, it's not quite as jarring. You might want to consider an interview format, such as this, and where the person's looking off camera. Now, there's some advantages to that. Sometimes it's a lot easier for an inexperienced subject talking to a person rather than a camera lens. Not that many people are used to talking directly to a camera. And they could be prompted by the interviewer with questions. Tell me about how this came about. Or they can actually read a script or have notes held up by the interviewer. And that will sometimes it's a lot easier than having them directly address the camera. It's real important, if you reposition the camera for alternate angles, that you stay on one side of the interviewer. I'm going to explain that in a second. Do not cross the imaginary line that runs between the interviewer and the subject. It's called an action axis. One of my cinematography instructors way back when explained the action axis this way. He went out, he was doing a story on shooting a video on children walking to and from school. So they went out in the morning and they shot a group of children walking to school, and they were walking from the left to the right because that's where the sun was, and they're walking from left to right. Well, they went back in the afternoon and wanted to shoot them coming home from school. So they went to the other side of the street because the sun had changed. It was in the afternoon. And so since they went to the other side of the street, here come the children walking home from school, and you guessed it, they were walking left to right. So they walked to school left and right, and they walked home from school left and right. And that made absolutely no sense visually, but that's what you get when you have an action axis. Pardon me. In an interview situation, here's what it looks like. All right, this is a little weird. I realized that I hand drew it. You have the subject and the interview. You're looking overhead from an overhead, and those are two people seated. You have the subject, the interview subject at the top. You have the interviewer at the bottom. You see that dotted line that runs down the middle. That's the action axis. It runs between them, and you see the camera on the just to the left of the interviewer and shooting the interview subject, just slightly off, slightly off center. Well, as long as you stay on the left side of that dotted line, everything is fine. You can move from the interviewer to the subject and back, and both the subject is looking left to right, and the interviewer's looking right to left, and everything's cool. But as soon as you cross, if you take that camera and you go from the left shoulder to the right shoulder, everything reverses, and you have them looking the same direction or different directions. It can be very jarring. Now, here's my contact information. I have Ron on there. You could call him, but he won't know why you're calling. My contact information is right there. You can feel free to call me with any questions. I hope this is useful to you. And we will have a separate video coming up, and it will be on YouTube that will talk about the editing process. I hope this is helpful. We'll see you later.